Hello student, welcome you to Mohan Sir's classes. In this class, we will learn chapter 12, the making of the Indian Constitution, which is the first chapter of political science section. And this is the part 2 of this chapter. In the part 1, we have learned what is constitution, why do you need a constitution, and the history of Indian Constitution. But in this class or the part 2 of this video class, we will learn Constituent Assembly and its function. In this class or today's class, we are going to learn Constituent Assemblies and its functions. Let us begin the class. The Constituent Assembly and its functioning. And the paragraph goes like this. In 1946, the British government sent a cabinet mission to India under the chairmanship of Lord Patrick Lawrence to suggest the government system and independent India would set up and the process it would be followed to adopt a new constitution. So in this sentence or in this paragraph, it is said that in the year of 1946, British government sent a cabinet mission. Listen carefully. In the year of 1946, British government sent a cabinet mission. For what? To India under the chairmanship. They sent to cabinet mission to India under the chairmanship of Lord Patrick Lawrence. Listen carefully. In the year of 1946, British government sent a cabinet mission. To where? To India. For what? Under the chairmanship of Lord Patrick Lawrence. What was the reason the British government sent a cabinet mission to India under the chairmanship of Lord Patrick Lawrence? The reason is that to suggest the government system and independent India would set up and process it would follow to adopt a new constitution. That means to suggest Indian independent government to set up and to establish a new constitution. Understood? In the year of 1946, British government sent a cabinet mission to India. Who was the chairman? Under the chairmanship of Patrick Lawrence. And what was the reason they sent? That to suggest independent India to set up and to establish a new constitution. Next sentence. One suggestion at the time was for all the adult citizens to elect Constituent Assembly to draft the constitution, but many people felt that such a process would be too time consuming. Listen carefully. In this sentence, it is said that one suggestion at that time was, what was the suggestion? That all the adult citizens to elect Constituent Assembly to draft or to make constitution. What was the suggestion? That means all the adult citizens, that means those who are above age of 21, they have to elect Constituent Assembly to draft or to make the constitution. But what happened? But many people felt that such a process would be too time consuming. So many of the people, they thought it will be consume more time. So in this paragraph we will learn that in the year of 1946, British government sent a cabinet mission to India under the chairmanship of Lord Patrick Lawrence. For why this? What was the reason they sent cabinet mission? To suggest India government, independent India, to set up and establish a new constitution. And they also suggest that all the adult citizens, that means those who are above age of 21, would elect Constituent Assembly and make the constitution. But what happened? Many people thought that it would take more time. Next paragraph. After much discussion, the cabinet mission suggests a way to compress the process. So what does this sentence says? That means after much discussion, the cabinet mission suggests a way to compress the process or to start the process or to begin the process. That means after much discussion, the cabinet mission they suggest to begin the process. Next sentence, it proposed that the provincial assemblies elected under the 1935 Act should act as the electoral college to choose the representatives of the Constituent Assembly. What is proposed? It proposed that Provincial Assembly elected under the 1935 Act. Listen carefully, it proposed which one? The cabinet mission they proposed that provincial assemblies elected under the 1935 Act should act as the electoral college to choose the representative of the constituent assembly. That means the cabinet mission they proposed that there was a provincial assembly, those who were elected under the Act of 1935, they should elect the college to choose the representative of the constituent assembly. Next sentence, thus, instead of direct election by the people, the elected provincial assembly would elect the representatives. That means what happened? It's supposed to be directly elect by the people, but now what happened? The elected provincial assembly would elect the representative. Understood? That means instead direct election by the people, the elected provincial assembly would elect the representatives. So in this paragraph we learn that after much discussion, cabinet mission they suggest that to establish or to begin the process of constitution, and they also propose that provincial assembly, that means in the year of 1935 Act there was a provincial assembly was elected and they should act as a electoral college to choose the representative of the constituent assembly. Next what happened? Because of that reason, instead of direct election by the people, what happened? The representative were elected by the provincial assembly, by the provincial assemblies. Next paragraph, the indirect election process was adopted by July 1946. The provincial assemblies had elected 292 representatives from the 11 provinces. So, what it is said here? That means the direct election process was adopted by July 1946. July 1946, the direct process was adopted. The provincial assembly had elected how many? 292 representatives from 11 provinces. Listen carefully. Indirect election process was adopted in the year of when on July 1946, and the provincial assembly had elected 292 representatives from the 11 provinces. That was one representative of the constituent assembly for every 10 lakh people in the population. That means in every 10 lakh people, one constituent assembly. Understood how the election process was took place? That means one representative of the constituent assembly would be each 10 lakh population. That means for a 10 lakh population, there will be one representative of the constituent assembly. Next, the princely states nominated another 293 representatives with Delhi, Ajmer, Marwar and it is called what? Balochistan province had one is to give a total of 389 representatives in the constituent assembly. Listen, there were princely states. They had nominated 93 representatives. How many? 93 representatives. Where? So while Delhi, Ajmer, Marwar and Balochistan province had one is to give a total of 389 representatives in the Constituent Assembly. So in this paragraph it is said that the indirect election process was adopted by July 1946. What happened in that time? The provincial assembly, they had elected 292 representatives from the 11 provinces. That means for 10 lakh population, a representative constituent assembly was elected. In same time, what happened? There was a princely state, they had nominated 93 representatives. Altogether, 389 representatives in the Constituent Assembly were elected. Where? In the July 1946. Next paragraph. During this time, tensions were rising as discussion began to divide the country along religious lines. What happened? In that time there was a tension. Tensions were what? Tensions were rising. For what? Discussion began to divide the country along religious lines. Based on the religious lines, they wanted to divide the country. That's why there was tension was rising among the people. Communal riots broke out in many regions. There was many communal riots and fight took place in many of the regions of the country. When the Constituent Assembly met for the first time on December 9, 1946, it was clear whether India would remain one country or be bifurcated. Listen. It says that when the Constituent Assembly met or established for first time, when it was December 9, 1946, so it was not clear then. It was not clear then whether India would remain one country or it would be bifurcated. What is bifurcated? That means divide into two separate countries. So listen carefully. When the first Constituent Assembly was started in the December 9, 1946, in that time it was not clear that either India would be a single country or it will be divided into two countries. It was also not clear whether the princely state would be accessed to India from the independence or from independent state. That means people were not clear that either the princely state they will be included into India or join with India or they would form a independent or separate states. It was in this environment that the meeting was held with Dr. Rajendra Prasad being elected as the permanent chairman of Assembly on December 11, 1946. So what happened? In this environment or situation, meetings were held and Dr. Rajendra Prasad he was elected as the permanent chairman of the Assembly when December 11, 1946. So in this paragraph it is says that during this time what happened, there were many tension and discussion was going on about that people would divide the country based on the religion. And because of that what happened, there were communal riots and fightings were taking place in many of the regions of the country. So when the first time Constituent Assembly was established on December 9, 1946, in that time it was not clear that either India would be remain as a single country or it will be divided into two separate countries. And it was also not clear that either the princely states will be included or join with India or they would form a independent state. So what happened? In this time or in this environment and situation what happened, meetings were held and Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the permanent chairman of the Assembly on December 11, 1946. Next, do you know? After the bifurcation, the Indian Constituent Assembly was left 324 members, of whom 235 were representatives of the states and 89 of the princely state. That means when India was divided into two, or after the division of India, the Constituent Assembly was left only how much? 342 members. Before we had how many members? 389 members were there. So after the division, what happened? There were 325 representatives were from the state and 89 of them become what? Princely state. Earlier there were 93 princely states, but after the division there were only 89 princely states. Next, after August 15, 1947, the Constituent Assembly became the sovereign body serving as the first legislature of independent India. But when India got independence on August 15, 1947, the Constituent Assembly become the sovereign body. What is sovereign? That means a government which is not ruled by or not controlled or managed by some external force. That means our assembly, our government and our people. So it was what serving as the first legislature of independent India. Next, its member thus become responsible for framing the constitution, enacting legislation, formulating policies and administrating the government. That's why the members, which members? This constituent assemblies members, they become the responsible for framing the constitution, enacting legislation and formulating policy and administrating the country. So in this paragraph it is that after the division of India, the Constituent Assembly was left with 324 members. Out of that, 235 were representatives of the state and 89 of them were princely state. Next, when India got independence on August 15, 1947, the Constituent Assembly became the sovereign body, the most powerful body, and served as the first legislature of independent India. Next, its members, which members? That means this Constituent Assembly members, they become responsible for making the constitution or implementing the legislation or law. Next, formulating or making the policy and administrating the country. Next paragraph. By February 1947, it was clear that the country would be divided into India and Pakistan. Listen carefully. By February 1947, it was clear that country would be divided into two, India and Pakistan. The rulers of the princely state began sending their representatives to the Constituent Assembly from April 1947. What happened? The rulers of the princely state, listen carefully, the rulers of the princely state, they began sending their representatives to the Constituent Assembly. From where? From April 1947. Following the partition, a special session of the assembly was held from August 14 to August 30, 1947, in which it declared itself as the sovereign lawmaking body of independent India. So what does this sentence says? That means following the partition, that means following the division of India and Pakistan, there was some special session held in assembly from the August 14 to August 13 in the year of 1947. And in that assembly, it was declared that the sovereign lawmaking body of independent India. That means India was declared as a sovereign or most powerful lawmaking body of independent India. That means after the partition of the India and Pakistan, special sessions were held in assembly from August 14 to August 30 in the year of 1947, and there it was declared that India was as a sovereign law making body of independent India. Next, It immediately began its work by setting up Constitution Drafting Committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar on August 29, 1947. So what happened? Immediately, country began its work by setting up Constitution Drafting Committee or Making Committee under whose chairmanship? On the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar or Bhimrao Ambedkar on August 29, 1947. So in this paragraph it is said that by February 1947 it was clear that the country was going to be divided into India and Pakistan. Thereafter the rulers of the princely state they started sending their representative to the Constituent Assembly from April 1947. And by following this partition, what happened? There was some special sessions held in assembly, that is from August 14 to August 13, and there it was declared that India was a sovereign law-making body of independent India. Thereafter, they immediately began its work by setting up what? Constituent Making Committee. That means they set up a committee for making the constitution, and the chairman of this committee was Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, and it was started August 29, 1947. Next paragraph. Meanwhile, the process of merging the princely state into India Union was underway simultaneously. That means in the time while there was a committee was established August 29, 1947 to making the constitution under the chairmanship of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. So in that time what happened? There was a process. What process? That means princely states would be joining with India. So that work also going on. At the same time, Pakistan launched a war to acquire Kashmir. Even India and Pakistan border was being demarcated after the partition. That means in that time what happened? Pakistan launched a war to acquire or to capture Kashmir. What happened? Though India-Pakistan border was divided, even then this Pakistan attacked or launched a war to acquire or to capture Kashmir. Communal rights continued to rise across the country during this unsettled period. During this period, that means it was not completely settled that, or India was not completely separated or established in that time. So some communal riots or some communal fight and war was going on in different regions of the country. So in this paragraph it said that when August 29, 1947 a committee was established for making the constitution under the chairmanship of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. During that time what happened? There was a process also. Which process? That princely state would be joining with India. In same time what happened, or at that time Pakistan attacked war or launched war to whom? To capture Kashmir. Though India-Pakistan border was demarcated or partition, only it has done. So what happened? Communal riots or fights was continued to rise across the country during this unsettled period. Next paragraph. The work of drafting the constitution, however, continued despite of these upheavals, with committees being set up for special tasks. What happened? The work of drafting the constitution, that means the work of making constitution was going on or continue going on when as there were some fightings and war going on within the country. What happened? The committee being set up for specific tasks. That means during this situation what happened? The committee they were being set up for some specific tasks. And what were the tasks? Number 1, Union Constitution Committee. The first task was Union Constitution Committee. Second, State Committee. Third, Fundamental Rights and Minority Committee. Fourth, National Flag Committee, etc. So these were the committees were set up and given the special tasks. So in this paragraph we learn that while the making of constitution was going on, so in that moment though there was a fight and communal rights was going on, even then the committee was being set up for specific tasks. Those tasks were: first one, Union Constitution Committee; second, States Committee; fourth, the third, Fundamental Rights and Minority Committees; fourth, National Flag Committees. You can look at this image, we can understand. What is this image? It is a committee at work under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Next paragraph. On March 17, 1947, the subcommittee sent questionnaire to all the members of the provincial assemblies and legislative bodies as well as the federal legislative bodies, inviting their opinion on the main features of the proposed constitution. So what does this paragraph says? It is said that on March 17, 1947, the subcommittees what happened? They sent some questionnaires. Subcommittees, they sent some questionnaires to whom? All the members of the provincial assemblies. Listen carefully. On March 17, 1947, the subcommittees, they sent some questionnaire to all the members of provincial assemblies and legislative bodies as well as the federal legislative body. To whom they sent the questionnaires? Listen carefully. All the members of provincial assembly, second, legislative bodies, and third, federal legislative body. So for what they sent the questionnaire? That means inviting their opinion on the main features of proposed constitution. That means to know their opinion. Whose opinion? This provincial assemblies, legislative bodies and federal legislative bodies. So this committee, which committee? Subcommittees, they want their opinion for proposed or for what? The main features of the proposed constitution. The minorities and fundamental rights subcommittees published their questionnaire in the newspaper to initiate an open and transparent discussion in public forums. So there was other committee. Which committee? The minority and fundamental committees. They published their questionnaire where? In the newspaper. For what? To initiate or to start the open, transparent discuss in the public forums. That means to discuss with public openly or transparently. Next, people communicate their views to the subcommittee by writing letters. People given their opinion how? By the letter. That means when the questionnaires were published in newspaper, people used to read that questionnaire and they used to give their opinion through a letter to the subcommittee. In this way, the work of Constituent Assembly remained in the public eyes as people's participation drafting the constitution increased. So in this what happened? The work of Constituent Assembly remained in the public's eyes and people participated in making the constituent or constitution. So in this paragraph we learn that on March 17, 1947, the subcommittee they sent the questionnaire to some of the members. Which members? First, all the members of provincial assembly. Second, to the legislative bodies. Third, to the federal legislative bodies. Why or what letter they sent? They sent the letter that who? The subcommittee they sent the letter to these three groups that they had to give their opinion for the main feature of the proposed constitution. Thereafter what happened? The minorities and fundamental rights subcommittee they published their questionnaire in the newspaper. For what? To initiate or to start the transparent discussion with the public. Next, the people communicate their opinion through writing a letter to this subcommittee. In this way, the work of Constituent Assembly remained in front of the public eyes and people participate in making the Constitution. Next paragraph. Every article of the proposed constitution invited controversy and was widely discussed, but without the debate degenerating into personal confrontation. What happened? Every article of the proposed constitution invited controversy. That means whatever the article proposed, so it invited what? Controversy, and it was widely discussed, and those proposed were discussed in the assembly, but without the debate degenerating into personal confrontation. That means they did not confront. What is confrontation? That means did not challenge personally. All the suggestions were seriously considered, with people giving written statement of the ideological basis with their views. That means, as they sent a question to the people as a letter and through newspaper, when the people given their response, those things were seriously considered, and those what the people given as a written statement about the ideological basis of their views, those things are seriously considered. The depth of seriousness of the drafting procedure can be seen in the extract from the constitutional debates given in the box. Look at this box. So what happened? The depth of seriousness of the drafting procedure can be seen in the extract of the constitutional debate given the box. That means what were the depth and the serious discussion taken place for making the constitution, that we can see from the box. So in this paragraph it says that all the articles which was proposed to constitution invited what? Controversy or misunderstanding was widely discussed, but it was without debate degenerating into personal confrontation. That means they did not debate as a personal confrontation. Next, all the suggestions given by the people were seriously considered as people given their what? Logical basis of their views, and the depth of seriousness or how seriously this assembly or the constituent assembly discuss for making this constitution, that we can see from the box given. Next paragraph. The drafting committee also studied the constitution for of 60 countries. Listen, that means we know that under the chairmanship of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, on August 29, 1947, there was a committee established for making the constitution. Those committee, what happened? They studied the constitution of how many countries? Of 60 countries, inviting the views of constitutional experts from these countries and sharing their conclusion with the legislative assembly and public. What happened? This committee, which this drafting committee, they invited the expertise from different countries. They asked their opinion. They shared their opinion for what? Give the conclusion with the legislative assembly and the public. A draft constitution was prepared after this intensive process and presented on February 25, 1948. That means this draft making committee or drafting committee or constitution making committee, they studied the constitution of 60 countries. They also invited the views of the different experts from the different constitution, and they asked their idea, opinion to conclude the legislative assembly and the public. Thereafter, the draft constitution, that means that the copy of this or making the draft constitution or the constitution which was made or prepared, that was intensive process and presented. It was intensively processed and presented on February 25, 1948. It was published to invite comments, suggestion and criticism with a special committee looking into the feedback to finalize the report, which was also published. So why they published this draft constitution? That means people should read and they should give their comment, suggestion and criticism. And there was a committee, they were looking for the feedback of the people to finalize the report, and which was also published. So in this paragraph it is said that the constitution making committee, they studied the constitution of 60 countries. They also invited the experts to give their opinion and suggestion for making the Indian constitution. Thereafter what happened? A draft or the constitution of India was prepared, and this was presented on February 25, 1948. Thereafter it was published, okay, where in the newspaper and etc. For what? To invite or to get the comments, suggestion and criticism of people. Thereafter there was a committee, they were looking for the feedback of people to finalize the report, and which was also published in newspaper. Next paragraph. On September 17, 1948, a proposal was passed to translate the draft constitution in Hindi and other regional languages. That means it was on September 17, 1948, there was a proposal passed. Why? The proposal was to translate the draft constitution into Hindi and other languages. Next, October 6, 1948, the chairman of the Constituent Assembly again distributed the draft to all the members. Again what happened? On October 6, 1948, the chairman of the Constituent Assembly again he distributed the draft to all the members. For what? The main article and clauses and suggestions for the amendments were printed on the first page. That means on that draft, what did they do? The main article and clause and suggestion for the amendments. What is amendments? For the changes. So those were printed on the first page. Thereafter, this draft contained how much? 243 articles and 13 schedules. So in that draft, there were altogether 243 articles and 13 schedules. So in this paragraph, it says that on September 17, 1948, a proposal was passed to translate the draft constitution. For what? To translate into Hindi and other vernacular or regional languages. Thereafter, on October 6, 1948, the chairman of the Constituent Assembly he distributed the draft to all the members, and the main articles, clause and suggestion for the amendments, that means changes, were printed on the first page. So this draft of constitution contained how many? 243 articles and 13 schedules. Next paragraph. Between October 6 and 17, 1948, the numbers of articles discussed and finalized rose to 315. That means there was discussion from October 6 to October 17, and numbers of articles were discussed, and at last they finalized and the total article become how much? 315. Before how much it was? 243, but after finalize or after discussion how much it become? 315 articles. Dr. Ambedkar presented this new draft on November 4, 1948. So this new draft, which one? This finalized one, it was presented by whom? Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. When? On November 4, 1948. He explained why a major part of 1935 Act had been incorporated and what kind of government system India needed. So here he explained that why a major part of 1935 Act had been incorporated. and what kind of government system actually India needed, that he explained. So what you learn from this paragraph? That means between October 6 to 17, 1948, many new articles were discussed and finalized, and the finalized articles was 315. And what happened? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he presented this new draft on November 4, 1948. Thereafter, he explained that what was the major part of 1935 Act and why it had not been incorporated and what kind of government system actually India needed, he explained. Next paragraph. The Constituent Assembly then held session continuously for 11 months from November 15, 1948 to discuss the draft section by section and clause by clause. Thereafter what happened? The Constituent Assembly they held sessions continuously for how many months? For 11 months. From when? From November 1548. For why the sessions were held? To discuss the draft, how? Section by section and clause by clause. That means to discuss the draft section by section and clause by clause, the Constituent Assembly they held session continuously for 11 months, that is from November 15, 1948. Thereafter what happened? A total of 69 articles were finalized by January 8, 1949 and 2500 proposals of amendments were examined by October 17, 1949. Listen carefully. After that 69 articles were finalized. Thereafter again 69 articles were finalized when? January 8, 1949. Thereafter what happened? 2500 proposals amendments were examined. Again there were 2500 proposals were there that has to be changed. So it was examined on October 17, 1949. And this was called the first reading. This was called the first reading. So in this paragraph we will learn that to discuss the draft section by section and clause by clause, the Constituent Assembly they held the session continuously for 11 months. Next, total of 69 articles were finalized on January 8, 1949. Thereafter, there were 2,500 proposals which to be amendments. It was examined over October 17, 1949, and this was called the first reading. Next paragraph. Similarly, by November 16, 1949, concessions was built up on 386 articles. So at last what happened? November 16, 1949, there was a concession was built and the total article was 386. This was the second reading. This was the second reading. And this October 17, 1949 is the first reading. November 16, 1949 was the second reading. The third reading of the Constituent Assembly began on November 17, 1948. The third reading was when? November 17, 1948. Listen carefully. The first reading, October 17, 1949. Second reading, November 16, 1949. And third reading, November 17, 1948. The final draft contained 395 articles and 22 schedules which had been discussed over 14 days. So it was approved on November 26, 1948. Listen. At last the final draft. It contained how many? 395 articles and 22 schedules. So it has been discussed for how many? Almost 114 days. They discussed almost 114 days and they finalized 395 articles and 22 schedules. And it was approved when? November 26, 1948. Listen. First reading was October 17, 1949. second reading November 16, 1949, third reading November 17, 1948, and the final when November 26, 1949. And in this final reading or final approval, there were it taken almost 114 days to finalized, and they finalized how many articles? 395 articles and 22 schedules. Next, two copies, one Hindi and other English, along with printed copy in English, were placed in Legislative Assembly on January 24, 1950. Thereafter, what did they do? Two copies, one is in Hindi, one is in English. The printed copies were placed where in the Legislative Assembly on January 24, 1950. All members of the House signed the three copies at the request of the chairman, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. That means, with the request of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, all the members of this Constituent Assembly, they signed on the three copies. The Constituent Assembly session came to a close with the signing of the national anthem and with singing of the national anthem and Bande Mataram. What does this sentence says? That means the Constituent Assembly session came to close. That means the finalized. When it was finalized, they sung national anthem and Bande Mataram. So in this paragraph we will learn that November 16, 1914, again there was a constitution built and they finalized 386 articles, and this is called what? The second reading. Next, what happened? The third reading of the Constituent Assembly began on November 17, 1948. Thereafter, what happened? The final draft contained 395 articles and 22 schedules, and which has been discussed almost 14 days. So it was approved on November 26, 1948. Thereafter, two copies, one is in Hindi, other is in English. It was printed and kept in the Legislative Assembly on January 24, 1950. All the members signed on three copies through the request of Chairman Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And at last, when the Constituent Assembly was finalized, they sang national anthem and Bande Mataram. Next paragraph. The making of the Indian Constitution had taken 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. Listen, very important. For making Indian Constitution, it taken 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. The majority of the population welcomed and accepted the Constitution, even though the people had not elected the Constituent Assembly. That means, though the Constituent Assembly were not elected by the people, even then majority of population welcomed and accepted the Constitution. So what was the actual extent of people's participation in drafting the Constitution? The next question, that what was the actual extent of people participation in drafting Constitution? That means how people extend or participate in making Indian Constitution. The Constituent Assembly debates were published and widely disseminated through newspaper and magazines. Understood? That means the Constituent Assembly debates, they published in the newspaper, that was widely discussed by the people. After that, people write and given their opinion through the letters. So in this paragraph we learn that for making the Indian Constitution, it takes 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. Though the representatives were not elected by the people directly, even then most of the people or majority of people accepted and welcomed the Constitution. Next, the question was that how actually people participate in making Indian Constitution, and the answer is that the Constituent Assembly published all the debates in newspaper. Thereafter, people read, they understood, and they given their opinion and suggestion by writing the letter to Constituent Assembly. Next paragraph. People also regularly presented memorandum to the assembly, but in those days, literacy rate of the males was only 27% and very low, 9% for females. That means what happened? People also regularly they presented their memorandum to the assembly. But what happened in those days? The literacy of the males was only 29% and female was only 9%. So it is an open question as how and what extent the opinions of the literate men and women reach the max of the constitution. So it is an open question that how the literate men and women participate or given their opinion for making the constitution. So in this paragraph it is said that people regularly present their memorandum to the assembly in those days. That means when the Indian constitution was made, only 27% of male and 9% of female were educated, and those people had open questions and their opinion given for making the Indian constitution. So this is the process that how the Indian constitution this is the process how the Indian constitution was made and prepared. So hope all of you understood that the process and functions of the Indian constitution, or the process how the Indian constitution was prepared, or what are the method, who are the committee, and what are the readings, everything we have discussed in this class. Next class, or the part third of this chapter, we will discuss the preamble of India. Next part, that is means part third, will be discussed the last topic of this chapter, that is the preamble of India.